we are joining you today for our Delete Digital Hate conversation series. And I'm going to now call on my colleague, Zulekha, to do the land acknowledgement, please.
Thank you, Nazhat. The City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples.
Thank you so much. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our Delete Digital Hate project, and then we'll pass it on to our host, Fatma Sayed, to introduce our speakers for this evening and get into the conversation. So CCMW's Delete Digital Hate project is funded by the Department of Canadian Heritage, and it aims to combat the surge in hate crimes in Canada, especially online hate and extremism. It focuses on empowering Canadian Muslim women, girls, and non-binary individuals to address online harms targeted at them. As part of this project, we've launched a 6-episode series titled Delete Digital Hate in Conversation With. So after the with, we have the guests that are featured at each session, and the discussions or the conversation focuses on online and digital hate, misinformation and disinformation, and how we can counter these effectively. The Public Talk series, which is part of a broader digital hate awareness campaign, focuses on empowering Canadian Muslim women, girls, and non-binary persons to address online harms that target them. These sessions are broadcast through or take place through Zoom, and they feature guest speakers, including subject matter experts, digital social media platform representatives, and users to share their personal experiences and emerging research and the latest data evidencing the severity of digital hate, its impact on users, and solutions to counter it. I forgot to tell you who I am. I'm Nushat Jaffrey. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce you now to our moderator for this evening. Fatima Sayed is a Mississauga-based journalist with the Narwhal, an online publication that offers in-depth coverage of environmental and energy issues across Canada. She has worked and written for many publications, including the Toronto Star, National Observer, The Guardian, and Chatelaine. She's the Vice President of the Canadian Association of Journalists, and she was winner of the 2022 World Press Freedom Canada Award. Now,
Thanks,
it
Nazat.
gives me great pleasure to pass it on to Fatima.
Thank you so much, Nazat. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all staying warm on this very snow-filled Thursday. I had to think about that, what day it is. I'm really happy to be here having this conversation. For those of you who attended the last one, we sort of got a broad overview of policies and strategies to approach online hate. And today we're going to get into a really interesting perspective about the ways youth can handle online hate. And this is incredibly important because young people are mostly online and dealing with it the most, to put it very, very simply. I'm joined by two amazing women to help me create this conversation for you. Jolin Joseph is a feminist researcher, evaluator, and facilitator based in Toronto. She's the manager of research, education, and knowledge mobilization at YWCA Canada. She's led strategic initiatives around gender-based violence, employment equity, and youth empowerment. She's authored several research reports, including the one we're going to be talking about today, Block Hate, Centering Survivors and Taking Action on Gendered Online Hate in Canada. She's also a Vanier Scholar and PhD candidate at York University. Also with us is Noor Fadel. I hope I'm saying that right. She's an award-winning educator, spoken word poet, and public speaker. Noor examines the role of race, trauma, and mental health through youth and racialized women experiences in Canada to better understand the increase of violence towards women globally, as well as the increase in violence and racism towards visible minority groups across Canada. She's currently completing her studies in peace and conflict. She's worked on many national campaigns across the country to combat online hate and violence towards women, youth, and children, while also doing a ton of research on this. Thank you both for being here. I'm going to get straight into it, and I wonder, Jolin, if you can just start by telling us a little bit about the blockade campaign, how it started, and what you've learned from it.
Sure. Thank you, Nuzat. Thank you for those, everyone, for convening us, and thanks, Fatima, for starting us off. So again, as mentioned, my name is Jolin. I am a settler immigrant in Canada, joining you from Treaty 13 territory, Toronto. I did want to acknowledge that we're going to be having this conversation kind of in this current moment. Online hate is taking place as we witness very real harms, people living through colonialism, imperialism, genocide, the legislative onslaught on trans and queer communities. So just folks, should you need to take a break, that is totally fine. If you want to check in with yourselves, we're getting pretty intense here, but I think it's also such a necessary and important conversation to have. So I'm really glad that you're here with us today, especially I wasn't quite expecting the snow dump that we had today. So thank you for those of you who are staying warm, staying in, and logging on. So to your question, Fatima, about about the project and what prompted us to launch it, perhaps. YWCA Canada is a national organization that has been on the front lines of gender equity work. Our work, in fact, to end gender-based violence has spanned 150 years. But over the last little bit, we've seen more and more how gender-based violence has entered the digital arena. It's expanded its reach and its scope. And that online hate has become one of the key modalities that's kind of extending this epidemic of gender-based violence in Canada, but of course across the world. So with that in view, about 10 years ago, we started a project, Project Shift. And that initiative was all about making digital spaces safer for young women and girls and gender diverse people. Because we saw how much hate is directed at young people online, particularly those from equity-deserving, equity-denied communities, folks with intersectionally marginalized identities, folks that are racialized, with disabilities, Indigenous. And we knew we wanted to partner with them, to take action, to ensure the community voices are made vital to the design and development of online spaces, of social media platforms, and to their governance as well. And another key pillar of our work has always been building and investing in young leaders. We do this through leadership programming, through creating spaces in schools and community hubs. And then more and more, we started to realize that just as young people are beginning to take up space, as they're showing up online, they're getting engaged, they're advocating for causes that they're passionate about, they're also being exposed. They're experiencing that much more online hate, hate that is toxic, it's vile, and it's frankly terrifying. And so what that's doing is it's causing a digital retreat. It's eroding people's identities. And so what we did, of course, as a youth serving organization as well, is that we adapted very quickly our programming. We ensured that digital safety and literacy was embedded into all of our youth leadership training. And we ensured that they knew how to protect themselves in spaces and how to look out for others and, kind of co-regulate as they're all processing and experiencing online hate in communities online. But we also were very mindful that digital safety is only one small piece of the equation, that we need to be partnering with the platforms themselves and with government to regulate, but also build better spaces that are built in the image of our diverse populations, that are built for them and by them. So for that reason, we started this 4-year project that's funded by Public Safety Canada. That is a cross-sectoral initiative, and it is a research and knowledge mobilization project that works with the tech sector, works with social media platforms, so that we can fundamentally shift systems to be more responsive, to be more representative, and finally more resilient as well. So that's sort of like the long-winded origin story of the project itself that was funded through Public Safety's Community Resilience Fund.
That's great. And there's so much to unpack there. I want to share some statistics that came out of this report. That I mean, they're not surprising to me as someone who's been following this issue for a while, but they are striking when you see them, right? So 70% of people with a disability are 70% more likely to experience online hate. 59% are Indigenous people who are more likely to experience online hate. Black people are 53% more likely to experience online hate. And then 2S LGBTQI plus people are 59% more likely to experience online hate. Noor, I wonder if I can bring you into the conversation here, because as someone who's both experienced hate and has researched a lot of it, do those numbers sort of seem the same? Like, do those numbers seem high, normal? Like, how do you respond when you hear numbers like that?
I think once upon a time, a version of me, before my personal experience, I would honestly tell you that I would have been surprised, because the idea that has been fed to me at such a young age from everyone and all my peers around me is, there isn't any racism in Canada, or Canada's not a racist country. Like, don't compare us to our neighboring country. We are way better. We are full of, folks coming from all different types of, backgrounds and stuff. But unfortunately, that's not the reality of it. The reality is there's so many cases of racism, discrimination, both in person and online. But the problem is it's not being acknowledged, right? This conversation, especially, YWCA Canada is the first big project I've heard on anti-racism work growing up. And they were actually the ones who reached out to me as soon as my personal experience happened with a hate crime. And so now being in the scene of doing this work and all the anti-racism work we're doing and focusing on trying to create a safer environment online for young people and for everyone, these numbers to me are not shocking. I've recognized this is a reality, but to somebody outside of it, I'm sure they'd be like, well, where? I don't see it, I don't feel it, or just the way that society has really tried to keep it under. It's not as acknowledged as it is, but when you get into the conversation of it, you realize that sometimes we see things, but we're so desensitized to it as well. We're taught like, oh, it's just online, it's just a troll, like let it go, it's nothing, we're not supposed to do anything about it. So to create and give it that label of like that is online hate, that is actually not okay. It's it's basically like, when you say that, you have to be like, this is real, right? But when we're trying to avoid it and belittle the situation a lot by just kind of giving excuses to this behavior online, then when we look at these numbers, we kind of go, oh, where are these coming from? I didn't know it was like that. But yeah, once you're kind of in that scene, 100%, this is something that we know is there. And that's why we're doing the work. That's why a massive organization like YWCA Canada is doing that work, and organizations like, the Canadian Council for Muslim Women. We are doing this because we know it is so vividly present in our everyday group, in our society. And that's how we kind of get to the work of things getting better with it.
I wonder if I might jump off from there, Noor. You got at the core, kind of the beating heart of this project itself when you said, people are at the center of this work. And we really want to ensure that youth and survivors are at the center of all of the solutions. But they were also at the center of our research. They were the captains of the work, and folks like you, our Blockade Fellows, were equipped with training to go off and do that work in your own communities. And I think that's really what's made it resonant, I think.
It's so interesting because I am like completely resonating with everything you both are saying, right? And for so long, we didn't have the data, right? It was just experiences. Everyone was sharing their experiences online, like, oh, look at this email I got, or oh, look at this, what this troll said, or oh, look at this person who slid into my DMs and said this vile thing. So it was just experiences. And then we had folks like, YWCA and other, organizations start quantifying it, saying like how many people are actually experiencing it, how many people are how is it hurting them, right? Who is suffering mental health issues from it? Who is feeling anxiety from it? And we started collecting this data, but you're both also trying to push this data into action. And I want to get into that a little bit. So maybe Jolin, talk to us about the response this report and this campaign got, and what kind of actions people started thinking about and doing from it.
Yeah, thanks, Fatma. I think it has truly become such a core area of our work. I mean, both for our internal policies, how we collaborate within the sector and elsewhere, how we think about safety and the labor of women, girls, gender diverse people, racialized folks, but also how we show up in active allyship. It's something that has been, I think, responded to by the public, by the sector, by the government. We've had conversations with, of course, public safety, but Canadian Heritage, with Women and Gender Equality Canada. We've been able to step in and speak into campaigns that really engage youth in a way that we haven't before, that in past initiatives, we've seen very prescriptive, let the statistics say the story, but you're not actually involved. You're not at the helm of this work. But I think one of the really exciting parts of this was the model of how we did community-based participatory action research. So it really was to get at something that the youth have, the solutions that our communities that have been structurally and historically marginalized and oppressed, that they know exactly what they're looking for, they know what they need. And so what we need to do is give them space to step into that power. One of the key guiding lights and kind of really, I think, informed parts of this process has been our advisory committee that we convened, that's made up of tech sector partners as well as nonprofits and non-governmental entities that are serving diverse communities across Canada. And their mandate really is to help us get that clearer understanding of both the state of online hate across Canada, but also what we can be doing coming together in a way that understands the legacy of our legislation, of our online platforms, and really pushes back in a way that's building that sort of systems resilience, so that the folks who are most impacted by online hate are not they're not the ones who have to continue to be doing this work, that other folks can kind of take up that platform as well. And we know, as you said, that youth are right now the most connected generation they've ever been. Our friends over at Media Smarts have done a lot of this work. They have actually stats on that as well. I cannot begin to wrap my head around how fluent and savvy youth are online. And so it's just been really so gratifying to be able to give them a space and arena to come up and talk about this as well, how they would respond and what sort of solutions they want to see.
Noor, maybe build on that a little bit, like based on your experience with hate, and feel free to share that if you feel comfortable. Like, what have you learned about what action we can do from our individual experiences, but also all these collective experiences that are now being captured by reports like the one we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I started getting in this work at a young age due to personal and experience, which was back in December 4th, 2017. I was 18 years old, and I was actually the target of a hate crime. So it's just heading back home from work on the SkyTrain when a man started yelling words, racial words to me on a full packed SkyTrain. Never said anything to him. It was like two empty seats between us, and the rest of the train was full. And he began to threaten me and tell me that he was going to kill me and all Muslims. And at that time, I was kind of paying attention to the people around me, if anybody was noticing. And it seemed like everyone started huddling a little bit down. And when the attacker, noticed that nobody on the train was actually going to do anything is when he got physical and he striked me across the face. So when that happened, I just remember, having to call the police and go through all that process and calling my parents. And just like the first thing my dad said to me after we gave the report and everything and we were driving home was, "It's over now, just forget that it ever happened." But part of me growing up Muslim and somebody who at that time was a visible Muslim, so I wore the hijab before, I saw growing up multiple experiences where my mother was discriminated against. There was one time I remember where we were signing a rental contract to a new home, and to celebrate, my dad was taking us to get Slurpees, and she stayed in the car with her window half open. And when we came back, it was her, like a woman that was just leaving quickly, rushed away, and my mom crying, and her hijab basically torn off. And so that lady attacked my mother when we were in the car. And when we tried to talk to police and officials about it, they just mishandled it so poorly and made us feel like there was nothing that we could do. And so for me, remembering that and going through that and having my father, who obviously had good intentions, try to tell me to let it go and that it's over, all I could think about was that experience of my mother and the experience that so many people have probably been facing and are just forced to let it go because there's nothing we can do about it. And even that terminology, I hear sometimes we hear, trolls. When we think of a troll, the way that I feel when I hear that word is like, it's just someone behind a computer screen. We can't really do much about it. But we forget that that troll is literally somebody, even if there's like a robot behind it at one point that is controlled by somebody else who creates these programming within the system to be able to catch these things and do that online. So for me, going through that experience and deciding to go public, I decided to share my story online. And that's where, imagine being an 18-year-old thinking the worst night of my life was being attacked. When in reality, the worst of it was when I shared my experience. It was like hundreds of thousands of these comments of, you're writing this from an Iraqi prison, go back to your country, you Islamic whore, like just very horrible terminology and words. And the problem is, I can't remember the feeling of getting hit by that man. But what I do remember and what is always going to be there are the articles, the comments, the messages that people have been sending me. If you go Google my name right now, you'll find over 30, 40 different articles written by different organizations and journalism things internationally. And when you go on the comments on those, you can still see the hate there, right? So we have to remember that this isn't, sometimes we take away from the reality of how serious these things are, whether it's with your mental health, your safety, or everything. People were posting my address at one point, right? It's if we continue to downplay the reality of how hard these things are, we close the door to the truth of it creating way more serious things. And it is a very serious matter. So when that it happened and there was so much going on, YWCA reached out to me. And this was kind of earlier on in the work that they were doing. And they gave me a space to understand kind of what the work was happening. And then I was part of the Disrupt and Dismantle Fellowship with the YWCA. And that was what gave me a lot more knowledge to be like, I can do something about this as well. Because when it happened to me, it was like a fight or flight. I never gave myself time to heal or to go see a therapist about this, to talk about what happened. All I felt that I had to do was tell the world that it happened so that I no longer had to hear people tell me racism in Canada didn't exist. Imagine being 18-year-old and the only thing you wanted to do was prove everyone wrong to make sure nobody goes through what I just went through. Not even having time to heal myself or to give myself a moment to process what happened, right? And so this is why I do the work that I do. And this is why organizations like YWCA is doing the work that they do. These are something that is happening so much more frequently than we think it is. And it's not getting the attention that it deserves, and it should, because again, this is a very big reality. This is something that is happening, and there's always going to be things happening in society. There's always going to be a new headline, a new breaking news. And as soon as these things happen, hate follows. And it always, unfortunately, at this moment, it always will. And so this is where we're trying to find ways to give youth support. I can't tell you we can fix everything and put a band-aid on it. What I can tell you is now the knowledge that I have, I wish I had it when I was 18 after my attack. I wish I knew I had these resources available to combat it or just to help myself as well, right? Not even, having to spread the word, but to myself as a young teenager at that time, what I could have done for myself. And so this is a huge reason that I'm trying to continue this work, and I'm so happy to be supporting other organizations that are doing it. If it means I have to share my story a million times, I will. It's the least that I can do.
It's yeah, I wish the pathways that you both are talking about existed for you back then, Noor, right? Like I think that's one of the ways, if we're talking about optimism, one of the constructive ways the world has changed is there are now pathways to solutions. They may not be perfect solutions, but they exist. Whether it is just being part of research or being part of responses that support mental health, after such incidents. Like I've been in the journalism industry for 8 years, and when I started, these things didn't exist, and now there's more awareness and more, codified measures that can support journalists who are also dealing with online hate, and that's the same for youth and women and everyone else. One thing, Jolin, you mentioned earlier that you have like this advisory board that came out of this report that includes tech companies. And I want to talk about tech companies because I think they get off too lightly. And and I'm fine putting that on the record. They sort of have all this power to make safe spaces and yet are unable to. In the, and we can talk about it politically because it's all about free speech or whatever, but I do want to focus on the harms that not doing so creates. And I wonder, Jolin, like when you talk to these to representatives of these companies or people who work in those spaces, has the research swayed them, or has it impacted them in any way? Have the conversations evolved? What's their response to research like yours?
Thank you. And I'll begin with even sort of that ethical question we asked ourselves as we began to engage with the social platforms themselves, because we are not in the business of muzzling ourselves when we speak. We are very much, community grounded and, giving folks like Noor, giving ourselves, each of us in this work has experienced online hate, ensuring that we are not watering down our experiences and therefore not watering down our asks. And ensuring that they are accountable. And so in doing this work, it means that, things can get a little bit uncomfortable, but it also means that we're able to redistribute resources, that they're able to also put energy and attention into the voices that are coming from the ground. And they understand youth and diverse youth as a vital part of their user base. They know that there is a critical mass there, and especially as a national organization that has spokespeople amongst youth, we do see them sitting up and taking attention, but also kind of rolling up their sleeves and beginning to tinker with some of the tools that they have rolled out. So we're seeing changes in privacy settings. We're seeing one of the asks that came to us was to build out a lexicon of hate terms, hate speech, so that they can better nuance it. They can better understand the complexities, but also the context of Canada. One of the things that we gently but firmly responded back with is we're not about to publish a lexicon of hate terms, because that can then become a dictionary for hate actors, for bad actors. But instead, what we did is we invited them to more closed-door conversations in where we're able to make visible how communities, how youth are experiencing this on the daily, how that presents in terms of mental and psychological and physical health, how depleting it is, and really the changes that we need to see, because folks that are, for instance, speaking up about the harms that are happening are often the ones that are shadow banned, or once they report, things, or a complaint gets kind of lost in the ether. There is no sort of accountability in how long they will take to get back to the complainant themselves, or if at all they'll hear back. So what we're doing is engaging in a conversation that ensures that platforms see themselves as part of the solution, as a force for social good, for progressive change. And to hear that they're accountable to their users for their community guidelines, for their moderation efforts, to make sure they're putting in place clear and transparent practices, even as we call for a digital regulator that's sort of quasi-government as well. So these are a few of the pieces that we're really pushing for, that we can create kind of more community-oriented platforms, if you will.
Noor, do you think those actions will make this online spaces safer? Like, do you see those as constructive actions, or, are there other things that you'd like to see? I know you mentioned, for example, your experience with policing and the failure in that. Are you seeing institutions take this seriously after, so many years of thinking and experiencing and researching on this?
I wish I could see more. What I noticed and what I recognize is a lot of the times, even when I look back at when my incident first happened, I had so many institutions, organizations, political figures come to me, NPs, and be like, Noor, we heard about what happened. This is huge. Let's talk about it. They'll invite me over to their office. We'll sit down. They're like, what do you want to see change? And I'll say, point A, point B, point C, point D. They'll shake my hand, take a picture, post it on their Facebook, and I'll never hear from them again. Right. And so I wish I could say I've seen a lot more, but I haven't. The people trying to do the work are these grassroots organizations who, have been fighting on so many issues that, there's already so much on their plate for so many different causes that they're trying to, create the security and the safety for everyone. And so it's them just being like, look at all these facts. We are doing the work for you. We're not asking your company or your institution to go do it or to pay money for it. No, we're telling you we have this information. We have taken funding from this and this and this, did the research, found the answers, found all the data, found the stats. We have it all. This is all of it in front of you. Now the next step is, what are you going to do about this? And then a lot of the times it's, unfortunately, we don't really, hear or see things back. But at the same time, there are people that go, oh, this is actually, and we should do more research and we should do this more. So let's get you more funding. And so I don't think we're not at where we should be at all, but it's work that we're continuing to do. So even myself, so some of my work is with CASA, so the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. And a few years ago, they did the Eradicate Hate, Combating Online Hate project. And this was like a digital toolkit for a general audience on different ways to combat hate online, right? Because we know that if we can't stop it from the root at the moment, what are ways that we can support victims of it, or, provide to education providers, things like that. And then from that work that we found, we realized there's so much work missing specifically for youth and children. This digital toolkit could be this entire PDF document. And as someone, who's, 24 or 25, I could probably understand and read through most of it. But majority of the younger audiences wouldn't, right? So the way that we did work around that was through the Eradicate Hate app. So we took that digital toolkit and did it in a form of an interactive app for young folks to be able to use and navigate through. Easier steps, things to do, resources to provide, animation videos. So we are trying to find ways to make this as accessible and more easier to understand, to try to find ways quicker to combat it, to end it, or to work towards that goal. Again, I know it's not as easy as that, but we are working so hard to try to ensure that other folks do take this serious. And so, we are lifting and doing a lot of the heavy work, but it's for a reason we believe is so, so darn important. So yeah, not where we want to be in getting, that response back, but we're continuing that work, and I'm sure the more we do, hopefully more and more folks can kind of have that switch and they'd be like, okay, this is actually very important. How can we help?
This is great because I'm usually the one who's like, yeah, nothing's gonna change, but you guys are like, no, something's gonna change. You have to believe, and I'm feeling that energy, and I hope everyone else is. Um, let's talk about one of those things though on the horizon is online hate legislation, right? That's a huge deal. Um, could maybe be a game changer if done right. Big if. And I want to get both of your perspectives. You know, I know there are some recommendations that came from youth groups as well. How are we feeling about this piece of legislation, and what are you hoping that it will look like, Jolin?
Thanks. Yeah, that's a big one, Fatma. Thank you. It's been a long time coming. It's been foreshadowed for a long time that there's, it's coming any minute now. But I'm really, really glad to say that the government of the day is and has been taking it seriously and has been consulting. What we hope to see in the legislation itself is that there's real acknowledgement of the gendered nature of online hate, of the specific ways that equity denied and equity deserving communities have been differentially impacted or disproportionately impacted by online hate. But more than that, that there's real liability and legal liability and accountability for platforms to really respond to instances and incidents of online hate in their environments. And to ensure that those redress mechanisms are truly trauma informed. That, just as Noor mentioned, that we're not sending folks and communities that have been historically harmed by the police, by policing systems, back through those channels, that there's always consent and a human rights-based approach baked into this, that we certainly need that sort of swift and significant intervention, but that has to be intersectional. It has to be completely understanding, coming from a lens of understanding the embodied experience of not just experiencing online hate, but also trying to go through the motions of having that reported, because there is often no healing in that. And folks are turning to community, they're turning to friends to seek that healing. So really then why go through those motions? So what folks are looking for, especially through this legislation, I think is also a little bit more of funding towards advocacy and awareness raising, because folks see themselves, especially youth, as key constituents of online spaces, as well as community organizations. So sending more at every level of government, parking more money towards the core operations of community organizations, I think will go a long way towards addressing hate speech, because we have the solutions, we've been making those interventions, and it will enable us to keep doing what we do, but will also give us more clarity and understanding around online hate as experienced by the communities that we are present in. That resource allocation, I think, will also just create much more supportive spaces for youth, because they want to connect. It's those peer exchanges we're hearing that are helping youth, because they're able to come down from those experiences. It's not just comforting to know someone else's experiences, because no, you don't want that for your friends. But there's also, they're trading in their techniques and tools. And so creating those spaces for youth, being able to come alongside, is a form of protecting themselves and protecting others and building that safety and resilience, and really changing that broader landscape of online hate. Because what we're doing right now through a lot of our programming is ensuring that folks are able to be active digital bystanders, and putting that training through schools, putting that through curriculum, getting better funding and exposure to that, amplifying that would be another great way of changing this. So we're really hoping to see in that legislation, again, that acknowledgement of how this hate occurs in different forms and how it's experienced differently by equity deserving communities.
I mean, one thing sorry, I'm being skeptical, but maybe that's the journalist in me. Will legislation fix all our problems? And I'll ask Noor to maybe answer this. And I'm thinking about it in the context of this moment that we're going through, right, in the world. where so many young people right now are online, not just for the sake of being online, but to follow what's happening, right? In Gaza, and to keep up with it, and the news more broadly, right? Whether it is Gaza or elsewhere. But there's so many people online, there's so many people sharing content, engaging with content, and dealing with hate, dealing with heightened emotions. And I can't imagine a piece of legislation that can make that engagement safe for everyone. And I wondered then, like, for me, when I think about it, it's like, okay, what do we want this law to be? We want this law to have pathways, perhaps, for people who experience hate, and maybe also for institutions to be able to deal with it before it starts. But surely it can't be like a one size fits all solution, right? So Noor, how are you thinking about this legislation in the context of everything the world is going through right now?
I mean, I don't think anything can fix something completely, right? But it's a huge influence. It is very important, right? Because for so long this has been something that's just been pushed under the rug. It's just non-existent. It's look at us, we are allowing people from all over the world to come here and to immigrate and to get their citizenship. And so we're welcoming this, we're welcoming that. And cases it is, we Canada's done or has tried to do some work in that, but there's so much work to be done, right? And we're not just bringing this to the legislation for nothing. It's not a useless cause. This is something that, again, our generation in this time is like 90% online, right? It's huge population of it is going on there. And as much as we can use online as an amazing way for us to gain so much knowledge, share so much knowledge, do so many ways to connect folks, people are using it in a harmful way. And we've seen it with so many different situations, even in different countries, school shootings, the New Zealand Churchill shooting, that started online, right? So we can go ahead and look at everything as the glass half empty, but if it gives us the chance to bring something a little bit to influence it a little bit more, I think that's a chance we want to take, right? I I wish at a time, and I'm sure people, I wish at a time during things happening, we had more support for it for victims. Because even as Jolene was saying, it's re-triggering, right?
Mhm.
As someone who has had to speak about my experience more than 400 times, it doesn't get easier, I'll tell you that. I probably desensitized myself to it. I've become numb to my experience and to my reality, but it doesn't make it any better. I still don't wish what happened to me, had happened. I wish an 18-year-old never had to go through that. I wish nobody else had to go through that. And maybe that's why I'm so passionate about, being a part of this cause. But it shouldn't be left on people that have had to face that to be the ones to speak up, right? Because if we just leave things to just be as it is, more chances of more things, more harm and violence will occur. And we've seen it. We've seen it already. There's been examples globally. So the legislation may not fix everything. And, I don't think anyone expects them to, but I think they have the ability to influence more and to at least respect and acknowledge that this is present and we do have to do something about it. It's giving it the light that it needs, that this is a problem and we need to take steps now, and not just leave it for those who will have to continuously be re-traumatized by it over and over again.
And I agree with, everything that was raised here. The law is such a blunt instrument, and to something that's just so ever evolving. We need to ensure that the legal framework that is rolled out is necessarily flexible, but also that it engages community actors that in a very real way in that regulatory process as well. So that's just two of the pieces I think that we're really hoping to see.
I have two more questions and then I'll open the floor, the virtual floor for questions. So if you have any, get them ready. Um, I want to give the audience some practical advice, right? So I want to leave them with some action items that they themselves can do. And I wondered if I could maybe go to both of you and ask to, one piece of advice for young people in terms of how they can combat or fight or even just, be online amidst all of this, and one piece of advice for perhaps older adults, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, who are watching over these young people and seeing what they're experiencing and how they can participate. Nor maybe we'll start with you this time.
I think one of my biggest pieces of advice, and I would think this would be more towards, parents, teachers, more, older figures for young folks, is a lot of the times I hear, including my own parents, very against being online, like, oh, you're always on your phone. It's not doing you any good. But then they'll be watching the news for, the entire day with the TV on to get their latest updates on things that are connecting them to the other side of the world. And so I don't think we should give online a bad reputation, because it's been a space that has allowed so much growth and connecting us. My parents fled the war from Iraq, for example. And at that time that the war was happening in Iraq, there was barely any media around it. And when there was very minimal information. People didn't realize the reality of how intense that was. And so we're now in a generation and a time where everything is being shared. We are learning so many different things, skills. The way that I can go on my TikTok and it'll tell me how to answer questions on an interview for a job you really want, right? Before I would have to go through multiple different, Wikipedia links, and it never connected me as much or didn't make full sense, or I didn't know which one was true or false. So social media and media and online obviously has some things that are not, the best, but it's a space that has room to be so incredible, so powerful, so amazing. And so when we have these shortcomings and these things going on, we got to take care of it, right? We got to do our part in ensuring that. And so, to parents and to folks, like, if you're unsure about, online spaces, ask questions, right? Even us, when I don't know something, I will go online and I will do my research on it, or ask folks about it. So ask questions too, because it really can, it's a way to just keep folks connected, and to really be able to do so much and to share so many things. And so if we're unsure about it, like, do a bit of that research on it, ask questions, and connect. Don't shut it off completely, because I promise you, sometimes you may think your kid is not doing much, but they could be doing so much more than you actually realize or recognize. And then for younger folks, my advice is, be a role model in the digital space, right? Like, you are going to be seeing 100% these trolls posting things and commenting. Don't take part in that. And if you see it, report it. It may seem like a very small thing, or, you're not doing much, but it's a start. And, we have to recognize that when organizations like YWCA does this work, and, when we're combating it and trying to work on it, for example, we are going to get in touch with these tech companies that have that full access to have that dialogue in that space. So, the more they see people actively being like, this is not okay, it gives a lot more room for, these big companies to be like, okay, we are noticing a lot more folks reporting. People are actually caring what they're seeing and accessing. So what can we do to ensure it to be a safer space?
Before we go to Jolin, I have to say that every time you say troll, I think of the movie, and then I think of Justin Timberlake's song "Can't Stop the Feeling," and I tried to not hum it because
Me
to me that's
too.
what trolls
Me
is.
too.
It's not an evil person.
Yes.
Jolin, give us some advice to take home.
Sure. I guess what I would say to youth is to be present, to take up space. Of course, we're not expecting ourselves to suddenly kind of take on or develop a Teflon coating and let things slide right off. No, this is real harm and it has a real impact. But there are ways to continue to be online, to continue to engage while you bring some balance and boundaries kind of to your digital presence as well. So there's ways to think about and be more mindful of your digital presence. Google yourself quite often, really, and think about your footprint in terms of what platforms are capturing and sharing about you, because certainly, just as they profit off of hate, because as we know, divisive content and discriminatory content, hate is clickbait. But in the same way, we're also noticing that social media platforms are sharing with other businesses real and true information about you. And they're also always changing up the privacy features. So always go in and toggle and change up and ensure that you are on top of your privacy settings, your sharing settings. You can choose to untag yourself if you're in a post that's unflattering or you don't want to be associated with. Just always post with purpose, I guess, is something that I also want to leave folks with. Just reflect on your interactions online. And this includes, yes, those comment boxes, but also who you're liking, who you're sharing. Just amplify people and posts that bring you joy, that bring you learning. I think that's just another way to ensure that your cup is full while you're staying online. Because again, as we say, youth are never not connected on multiple platforms. And we don't want that online hate, that pervasive hate, to be the filter with which you see yourselves and your potential. There is so much more out there. So you can link yourself and build communities where you are seen, where you can be vibrant, where you can be authentic and safe and your full self.
That was so awesome. We're gonna make merchandise with post with purpose. I want to end. I know online hate, this conversation has been so heavy, but so reinvigorating for me as well. So thank you both so much for this conversation. But I want to end on a moment of joy, and I love this question, and Jolin suggested it, so I'm really glad we're going to get to it. Is, we often, whenever we have these conversations, we always talk about the worst parts of being online, but there are some really fun parts. And we need to remind ourselves that, being online is educational, it's informative, it's connecting, and it's fun. So I wondered if we could all share like one moment of joy that we felt being online or in the digital space of some kind. Jolin, do you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. I have a toddler, and I've been thinking really quite deeply about, as I attend protests in person, about safety and, taking her along, and then just realizing that children are often not welcome in politically active spaces. And then I stumbled upon this entire area. I mean, as a true millennial, I found it on Instagram later, but I found an entire section of Roblox where little children were organizing pro-Palestinian, against the genocide, and there were little digital avatars holding flags and watermelons and what have you, and just thinking about kids across the world doing that, taking up space in the online realm, the joy in that, but also just the true hope. Because like you said in our conversation about legislation, sometimes doing this work, you just have to be a runaway hopeful person, because if you aren't just a little bit too naive in that way, you can't continue doing this work. It's what energizes you, it's what keeps you going day in and day out. And truly, the way young people are showing up online, especially in that moment, brought me such energy. It reinvigorated the whole purpose behind this work, I think. Yeah.
Noor, give us some joy that you felt recently in the online space.
I mean, honestly, the digital space has given me so many different joys. I've got to, especially when you go and do your work and you share your experience, and sometimes you feel so alone. I feel like it's connected me to some incredible people and organizations, CCMW, YWCA, CASA, like the work that I'm doing now. This was all through online spaces. And I mean, a lot of the times we share the reality of online hate and things, but through that we've created some incredible work to try to combat it, and seeing my peers and seeing my fellow, fighters doing this, it's an absolute joy. And even one of the projects that I got to do was with the, Canadian Council for Muslim Women. And I think you have the video as well. When I got to share a bit of my experience, we got to use, whether it was the blockade campaign with YWCA or this video with CCMW, just being able to visually share these experiences and these stories to make it something beautiful. So I don't know if you have the video now. I think you do, but welcome to play. I think we had like a 1 minute short video part of a bit of my project with CCMW. And what I did was share my experience, but this time me, it was my authentic version, it was my story. It wasn't the articles, it wasn't the headlines, it was my feelings, my moments. And a lot of my work that I do is through spoken word poetry. And so to be able to be given that space to do that with CCMW was, absolutely amazing. And I'd love for folks to see it if it's possible.
Yeah. Noor, if you don't mind, I could play a quick excerpt from it.
Yes, please.
No problem.
It was a day my life changed. He attacked me with nothing to defend myself but my bare hands and my red coat sheltering my shaking body. He hit me, yelled racial slurs, and tried to sexually assault me in front of a packed train. He abused me, and I just wanted it to be over. I wanted every part of that moment to be over, and yet time felt as if it was stuck. I became a story, a video, an article, a few minutes read to fill people's timelines with a moment of sympathy. I shared not because I loved the attention or because it doesn't hurt anymore. In fact, the story and the headlines made me feel less human. I speak to share the reality hundreds and thousands of Muslims face.
That was so beautiful, Noor. Thank you for letting us share a little bit of that with the audience here. I want to end it there, but I will share my moment of joy because I like this exercise and I've been thinking about it all day. And my moment of joy is I do a lot of reporting on climate change because I'm a climate reporter. And I also, unfortunately, do a lot of reporting on Doug Ford and what he's doing to the environment. And those two things are very heavy and dark. But in the past year, because we've been reporting so much on the green belt and what Doug Ford has been doing in terms of building houses in green spaces, there was this young woman made a fairy tale out of the entire saga and used our reporting to make this fairy tale. And it was so funny. It was hilarious. It was like King Doug Ford and, and how he was giving out free cheeseburgers to all of the land. It was hilarious. And I just thought it was so wonderful how you can put something online and it just takes a life of its own. And it can be such an interesting way, the way people engage with stuff, turn it into their own thing, how it boosts creativity and just sparks magic and creates connections. It can be so beautiful in those moments. And I loved seeing how, hard-hitting investigative journalism piece of work became this really fun fairy tale TikTok. It was great. So yes, I agree with everything these two ladies said. Spaces can be difficult, but they can also be magical, and we just need to learn how to post with purpose and make it magical all the time. I'll open it up to questions. I see one in the chat already, so maybe I'll pose that. So why do you see online hate in 2024 with media nowadays? Does anyone who is not a journalist on this panel want to take it? Come on, Jolin, you must have some thoughts.
I mean, sure. Yeah, it goes back to the fact that that divisiveness has traction. It is when you sort of invent the two sides on every issue, that's when folks are tuning in. Folks are now also, you say media, but there's such distinctions between the different forms of media because mainstream media is one thing, and then folks are going down rabbit holes of disinformation and misinformation now, which is creating even more divides, and therefore kind of emboldening people to hate on other groups, because they're really getting deeper and darker in kind of their beliefs, and getting, because it's an echo chamber then. For instance, if you're watching something on YouTube that is, again, a media narrative, it will then suggest more and more videos to you, and you go deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole, and then suddenly your views are so solidified you cannot see outside of that. You are not able to nuance or complicate your views, and they become very foundational. And so again, as keyboard warriors, folks then feel very strengthened in their fury and able to very quickly comment. One of the ways, and I always respond to this with ways kind of around it, to confront it, to, you know, push back or sidestep, is, for instance, something like Facebook, where even through our work we've seen is one of the key ways folks have been, you know, back when on Meta platforms, when news articles were being posted, you can sort by newest comment and not just by what's most relevant, because often what's shown up as most relevant are the ones that have all of the hate comments suddenly congregating, and all of the likes and dislikes and all of those. So again, just be a little bit more diligent in how you're sorting through the content that's being showed to you. But also, I just want to share here a really great example of counter speech in media narratives. There's a Swedish group, and it's kind of one of those examples of hashtag activism, if you will. The translation of what that group is called is "I am here," and they have a Facebook group where they post media articles. And folks that are volunteers, an entirely voluntary group, folks will go onto those media articles where they're sort of hotbeds of hate, and they'll go in and amplify or push back against the negative comments and amplify the original post or the truer narratives. And they do a lot of educating work through that group. So it's just such a wonderful way of kind of digital citizenship in action. So there are ways around that hate, but platforms, the media, they're all distributors of that sort of divisive content today, I think. So we have come to expect that, we have normalized that, but we need to continue showing up in ways that are rooted in empathy, that lead from the heart, that are compassionate, and are not so quick to dismiss the humanity of folks we're engaging with, that do not invalidate lived experience and expertise. So that's, I guess I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I feel like we could do a whole hour on this question. But I will say, and I see two hands up, so I'll say very quickly, like there's so many problems, there's so many layers to this question, or to this answer rather. But I think one of the main problems is that we now live in an information ecosystem where the algorithm gives you the news.
Mhm.
As much as journalists are doing hard work, what you're getting is based on the algorithm, right? That runs your social media account. And that's a problem because it creates the silos and the echo chambers that Jolin were talking about, and sort of solidifies your worldviews. And what I always say is, like, especially in this moment, you know, more and more people are engaging with the news, which is awesome for me, and my colleagues. But they're also angry at the news, which is also rightfully placed. Like, there's a reason why I'm wearing this shirt today. But I think, you know, what I say is that you should still engage with media, because you'll still get a perspective, you'll still get facts. Because at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, that's still information. Like, I've started reading Israeli newspapers just because that's how you learn sort of what is happening. And I think one of the ways we can combat hate against media is to genuinely engage with media and understand what is being said, where are the gaps, and how can we, as members of the community that are meant to be reflected in the media, actually fill those gaps. But Firdaus, you have your hand up. What's your question?
Great. Thanks, Fatma. I actually had a question for Noor. And Noor, again, you and I go a long way. You know, Noor was so brave when we did the digital, our Hate to Healing campaign, and the video that you just saw, it's just a teaser, but the actual video is, I think, 7 to 8 minutes, Noor, and you've done phenomenally well. You've got poetry, you've got heart, and everybody, I encourage you all to watch this video. It's on our daretobeaware.ca website. I will put it up in the chat. But I just had a question for you, maybe that, you faced street hate or hate in the public space. And then when you went to your online community thinking there will be compassion, there will be empathy, you were kind of faced with hate again. What was your mental health like at that time? I mean, I'm sure that there was a lot going on. Being a young person, many youth have so many other stresses. And how did you cope? Were there any kind of supports for you in place? And if not, what would you like to do about it, or help us do maybe?
It's probably been like 5 years since my attack, and I can tell you, you're probably the first person to ask about how my mental health was, surprisingly. A lot of it was so unprocessed. Again, like my flight or fight response was get it out there. And it's not to say that I didn't have some compassion online. For sure, a lot of the first messages and comments that I was receiving was people who were like, if it was me, I would have been there, we could have helped you. But then all of a sudden you just see this entire flood of all these other hateful, negative messages. And unfortunately, you know, my brain just started picking at these comments. I was no longer opening all my messages. I was opening the messages that looked like they were saying something bad about me. And I don't know why, but for me, maybe it was just like, why, you know, you go on, you be vulnerable online, and people just have something to say. And so for me, it took a while. I never gave myself proper time to process or to heal. And the kind of support I received was very minimal, even with I remember at the time, because when my incident was happening, we actually had, there was one gentleman named Jake who actually pushed the man off of me after I was hit. And that's how I was able to like take a picture of my attacker and get off the train. And so when that happened, even if you go online and you search up Noor Fadel, 80% of the articles was about my hero, Jake Taylor. And don't get me wrong, him and I are friends, love him with all my heart. He's an incredible guy. But he was a white male who all of a sudden the attention went on him. And it was like young, vulnerable, weak Muslim woman, victim Muslim woman, saved, rescued by man, and it just became this entire story of like oh, this white man saved this very oppressed young Muslim hijabi woman. And they put me as a victim, and I'm like, wait, but I was the one who I talked about it. I shared my story. I experienced it, and yes, it was very hard for me. But I'm not weak. I'm not a victim from it. Like this is not me. And then people would start recognizing me on the street after this, and they would literally be like, "Wait, you were that girl that got hit in the face on the SkyTrain." And I became the girl that got hit and attacked on the SkyTrain. I wasn't the girl who decided to share her experience to bring this awareness. I wasn't the girl who started calling out MPs and people being like, stop taking a photo with me and shaking my hand and actually do something, right? I wasn't the girl that, got to speak at a We Day event with over 20,000 youth were there and got to, share my experience and continuously do that. No, to them, I was this girl that got hit in the face and I was attacked. So it took a lot of time. And even now, I, unfortunately, some of the work, I feel like people don't even take me serious as a young person until I have to mention, like, well, actually, like, I'm doing this because I faced it. And they'd be like, whoa, what do you mean? And I have to talk about it in order for them to be like, oh, you have a right to for us to take you serious now, right? So it's not easy. It really isn't. I understand why people don't want to speak up when they face hate. I fully, fully understand. And sometimes I question myself, say, did I do the right thing by doing this? Because I feel like I lost a huge part of myself to strangers that don't even know who I am. But it's not an easy thing. And there wasn't a lot of resources, but there is now. but you're not exposed to it as much as you're easier to get different resources. It's so much easier ordering a McDonald's burger on Uber Eats than it is to find out somebody that can give me, affordable therapy support after facing this, right? Or just things like that. These resources that we so badly need are just so much harder to find, but they are available. And I'm hoping, with time, more folks can have that exposure to it. So, your mental health is very, very important. And I didn't get the support that I needed then, but I hope that my work can contribute to other people being able to get that support that I wasn't able to get.
Thank you, Noor.
I hate that you had to feel that way, Nora, but yeah, I mean, so many people have, so I'm glad, I'm hopeful that things will change and those experiences won't be for naught, right? Nuzat, you have a question.
Yes, and a very big shout out to Noor for sharing that story because, when you've experienced something as horrific as you did, and you are brave enough to share it with us, we can only commend you, but we can also learn from you because you could have just said, I don't want to talk about this anymore. You could have retreated. And I'm sure every time you tell the story, it must be triggering, it must be hard, but you're sharing because you want others to be aware, and also those who have experienced something similar, for them to heal as well, as you're healing. So thank you again. I want to, you talked about sharing the joy. And in a very sort of grim time when the news is always very negative and, painful, I was, thanks to Zoom, honestly, during the pandemic, it became the main vehicle for communications for us to meet and talk. So I attended a global rally on Gaza. Um, and it connected people. It was right after the UNRWA cuts, and that was the focus. But when I think about the people that were in this global rally from all over the world, what was amazing about it is, there was poetry, there was advocacy, there was sharing of stories, people sharing views, and there was so many voices, that came together. And now it's available online. The recording is available online. So if you missed the live event virtually, globally, then you can now watch it. And, you can have clips from it. People can share all kinds of, amazing quotes from it. And another thing that it did was it exposed me to certain people that I want to connect with and invite, as speakers, as poets, as, discussants. So just to say that in that online space, in this very, very dark time in our history, we can find, people and words that are powerful, that are healing, that also tell us that a lot of people around the world are feeling the same way as we are. We're not alone. Like, not feeling alone in the world is an amazing feeling, So this community, the global community that is sharing our grief and our pain, but also some wisdom and beauty in the words that they choose to express themselves in. So I just wanted to share that. And by the way, if you want to check it out, it was with the global rally was on with Just Peace Advocates. And if you type in, I can't remember the whole title, but if you just Global Peace Advocates Global Rally, you'll find it's on YouTube. But I have a question for both of you actually. So when you talk about counter narratives and you want to create, counter speech, counter narratives, from what I can see, it requires a lot of resources. So, you can have a volunteer organization like the one you talked about in Sweden, but it's almost like a full-time occupation where you're going to have to sit there and counter or do fact checking and put the correct information, but also come up with a message that's more positive to counter the really negative one. So can you talk about the kinds of resources that would be required, and what are some really good tips, for creating counter narratives? Anyone of
Jolin,
you
want to start?
Pick one up, yes. So certainly, Nazat, kind of crafting those counter narratives and getting eyeballs on it does take quite a bit of resources. But we're also seeing from the youth in our study that sometimes being really creative, almost kind of stepping into your snarkiness, that sarcasm sometimes travels really well. So one of the things that came out in our work is that a lot of youth are trying to lean into heart speech instead of hate speech. And they're, kind of using clapbacks or comebacks against online hate as well. And so it's kind of one way to say that I haven't been diminished by the hate that has been directed at me. I am still holding on to my personality. One of, in a really troubling stat that's often leveled against trans individuals, kind of to encourage suicidal ideations and self-harm is, it's also kind of an abjectly wrong stat, but I won't give you the stat because again, that is for trauma, not to avoid re-traumatization. But either way, there is a stat that just the number is often just posted on trans individuals' pages. And then this particular youth kind of repurposed that and said, you know what, actually, that's the number of police in the US that have been convicted of abusing their spouse. It's the same number. And so when they're just posting that number, they're kind of recontextualizing the number that's being posted on their content. And so this got a virality of its own as well. So there are kind of smaller inroads into counter speech as well that can then be picked up by the algorithm again. So it's just about yes, that labor, yes, getting an engaged group of volunteers, but counter speech often, if there's a little bit of humor, if there's a lot of heart packed into it, it can take off. And so kind of the folks that are kind of the original recipients or targets of that hate don't then have to carry forward that work because it mobilizes kind of counter publics or communities in that way because they're able to kind of pick up the baton and go from there.
Thank you. That sounds helpful.
Noor, do you want to add anything?
Jolene said it so well, and I was actually even remembering some events that they started hosting for youth, which was like these like hackathon things. So even information online that, like a Wikipedia article about something where, we may not think there's underlying, discrimination or false information or misinformation. We would go on there and have a group of different youth come and re-edit and change up these things to more valid or more other information on it, and I love that. I think that it's one thing to directly try to counter something, but it's another when you do it in a way where you're not just keeping that focus on that one specific thing. And I love that example that you gave, Jolene, with, when they give you a stat about one thing, there was other stats that was giving different information to just kind of prove like it's so hard sometimes focusing on these numbers or these stats alone and this information. What else can we provide, and how can we, do it not in a way where it's directly attacking or harming someone else, right? So as soon as she mentioned that, I was immediately thinking of the hackathon, and just even just small things like that make a huge difference where we're recognizing not all the information that we get is true. And even though there might have been something I read years ago, going back on it now, I know that's not the correct information for, and just going on and changing it and basically giving it a glow up, updating it to the right thing to really encourage that. And I love how you said the heart instead of hate, and I love that so much, because when we talk about these things, sometimes we do focus so much just on the negativity of things, but again, there is a lot of work being done that is trying to do the healing, to change the narrative of that. And yeah, Jolien, you're throwing lots of amazing,
This
t-shirts.
is how we're gonna fund it, okay, you guys? We're gonna
Ideas.
make a t-shirt line, and
It's
it's
a
gonna
social
be like,
enterprise.
and we're gonna
Really,
fund all of this work.
filling it up, heart, not hate. I love it. I love it so much. Yes.
This is how we win.
So before
Gotta
we
make merch.
before we leave, so remember the hashtag or the message on the t-shirts. Post with purpose and heart speech. Heart speech and post with purpose. All right, everybody, CCMW team, we've got, some wonderful hashtag ideas and merchandise. So
There we go.
I don't think I can add anything to that to say. I don't think I can add anything that was more profound than what any of these two ladies said. Like, wow, what a wonderful evening to spend with you both. So enlightening, so amazing, and it's a conversation I'll be thinking about for a while for sure. So thank you both so much. I think the one thing I will echo based on the last question is, as hard as it is to maybe challenge content, it's very easy to just hit that button and say this is wrong, right? And if more of us do that, that in of itself is a way to counter the narrative that is online. Um, to go back to it, it's posting with purpose and it's also correcting posts with purpose. So what we really need is just a more robust community that has each other's backs online. And hopefully conversations like this will help lead to that. Thank you both so much. I'm going to pass it back to Nazat and to wrap up.
Okay, what can I say? That was an amazing session. All of you had so much wisdom to share with us. And a big thanks to Fatima for moderating an amazing session, and Jolin and Noor for your experience, your knowledge. You have so much knowledge on the subject, and really a very frank and flowing conversation that I learned an immense amount from. So thank you both. And I hope, you know what, this is not the last time we're going to be doing this. We catch up again and we meet again. Maybe next time we'll have even more tips and more learning. So stay in touch, please. And very, very big thanks to all three of you. And I also want to thank our CCMW team that's putting this series together. So Firdaus, Iman, Zulekha, Duha, they're all here. And they are amazing, coming up with ideas for people to feature on the series. So thank you all. Now, our next session in the series is on February 22nd, which I believe is a week from today. And we will have someone from Meta. Her name is Erin Taylor. She is Public Policy Programs Manager. And her topic is going to be on the social media platforms. And what she's going to do is she's going to discuss enabling safer and more constructive digital discourse. So hopefully she'll be able to share firsthand what Meta is doing to help and protect us in the online spaces. With that, I think we may have some contact information. Do we have a slide on our social media handles or anything like that? If not,
Unfortunately, no. We'll add it next time.
okay, no problem. But I just want to say CCMW is very active on social media. And our brilliant Iman, who's here, she's the one who posts all our stuff on social media. We, we weren't there. We were not even in those spaces like 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, really. But we started, and now we're there. We're careful about what we share and what we post. But it's a very I would say still a pretty positive space for CCMW. We do get hate, but nothing like what a lot of others do. So I'm grateful for that space because we can put out some, positive messages and good information and celebrations. But I think I'm just grateful that we do have those platforms to share further our message. Before I go, I want to acknowledge that this has been one of the most difficult times that I personally have experienced with what's going on in Gaza and in the occupied territories, in occupied West Bank and in East Jerusalem. We can't forget that. I know there are atrocities happening in other parts of the world, like Sudan. So it's hard. It's really hard for everyone. We are going through very difficult and polarizing, times, but we find spaces like this to be together and be grateful. Be grateful that we are here, we are safe, but also let's think about those suffering and always, take a moment if you pray to pray for them and also think about peace. And I hope it's not too far away. And on that note, thank you all for joining us this evening. And thanks again, Noor, Jolin, and Fatima for being here. Say tu.